the first thing which I just want to lift off, Toby, I think you're right. You know, over the last few weeks and last night specifically, when I got the request for this, I said to my kids, I've got the small one wasn't at home, he's playing rugby, but my two kids, my favorite, my daughter and my oldest son, and I asked them the question of, what's the difference? My favorite's always my daughter, my little princess in between the boys. And I asked, what's the difference between misinformation and disinformation? Yeah. Okay, and maybe I'm getting stuck on the word misinformation, but I think fundamentally we're missing the first part of this, is misinformation versus disinformation, and misinformation and disinformation. Yeah. Where misinformation is the mistake we make. You know, I forwarded something that Toby had sent me, I sent it to Nollie, I didn't fact check it before I forwarded it, and it'll tell me on top of WhatsApp forwarded many times. Yeah, it's just me trying to say hello to Nollie with something hopefully useful. And then we realize it's a mistake, and I send it off, cool. But the problem is when I do that from a disinformation perspective, when there's malicious intent to be able to garner some sort of support, whether it's going to be social, political, or economic gain. And I think we've got to be careful, because while younger individuals understand what's the difference between misinformation, disinformation, the non-voting age individuals, my sample of understanding voting age people, we don't know the difference between misinformation and disinformation. And that's a fundamental problem, because there's a gap within the generations that's already being picked up to start saying, hold on, what am I dealing with here? And so I want to start with that, because it's important to start understanding that the emerging technologies such as AI, let's be clear, everyone, this world is new to everyone. Yeah. We've been talking about it, and here's me coming in from a lecturer perspective as an example. We've been tinkering as data scientists. Hey, what's the next cool thing we can come up with? Do we think about the social implications? The social, the economic, the political implications. Sometimes, no, you've given me data, guess what? I'm going to go crazy. And I'm sure we've done that in organizations. I'm sure we do that all the time. It goes back many, many years. And so, in the context of what we're talking about, where half the world is going to vote this year, we've got a fundamental problem. It takes the regulator anywhere between 3 to 5 years to regulate emerging technologies. Lest we forget, we easily talk about ChatGPT. We've forgotten about Meta AI, which is probably in 90% individuals' WhatsApps here right now. Yeah. Everyone's engaging with it. We don't know if it's the truth or not. But what do? We take it and we run with it. We forward it many times. And so I think what we've got to be careful about from a political perspective is the question is long gone whether this AI and misinformation and disinformation will affect democracy. It should be how influential it's going to be now. That time of is it or is it not is gone. And that's my view, and I think we've seen that globally. So to what Toby is saying, I think there's a lot of truth in it, but one level deeper. I think we've been able to, and I've done many experiments with people in a classroom setting, in a social setting, anywhere. We're relatively decent at picking up a picture that's fake. Relatively. We're okay-ish with text. My biggest fear is voice deepfakes that have been pushed forward with voice notes. 7 billion voice notes sent via WhatsApp. Okay? Now just imagine what I can do with that. I can overlay very easily, within a matter of 5 minutes, ex-politician's voice saying something that will suit me, my narrative. And forward that, and if you notice, none of us really looks and say, forwarded many times, it's a so what, no one cares about it. It sounds...
for the record, I do.
Right?
Especially if they're from my mother.
And just yesterday I was complaining to my wife because I was out in a public space and I get more voice notes now than text messages. Yes, there's a social part to it, you hear the emotion in my voice, I buy all of that, that's fine. So I think we've got a problem there. We can't discern with our ears, and that sense is still catching up to what's happening out there. Lest we forget that the humans have not yet been able to adapt, I'm not going to use the word evolve, but adapt to blue screen. We've got these nice glasses that have got this little filter on it, you've got it, I've got it, because we claim to be sitting in front of our screens all the time. Anyone check how many minutes they spend in front of their phones alone? right? So our behavior has changed. So I think the first problem that we're finding is the voting population not being able to discern what is true and what is not. We've seen some play at the highest level. In the US elections have essentially banned robocalls. In other words, stop that, right? So we've seen that coming through. We haven't seen it in the local context.
Yeah.
I know within the next few weeks I'll be getting SMSs from the beloved politicians. They'll even be phoning me. The day after the election, who am I? So we've banned that. The second major shift, which I have a slight negative stance towards, is there has to be some accountability and responsibility put on our big tech companies.
Yeah.
Has to be. We know that they've signed an accord, but if we dig deep into what is an accord, it's a voluntary signing. Lest we forget that their businesses are built on what? Recommendation systems. Those recommendation systems, I urge anyone here to open up their social media. I can look on your social media without anything and I know exactly what you're interested in because that's what you get fed. So while we are saying we've got to stop misinformation, disinformation, and we've seen some labeling of it, contextual pictures, etc., what we haven't seen is those recommendation engines that are changing. Is that they still work in the same old way. So what we're doing is we're solving a problem up here, we're forgetting about the system, and we're not being able to educate and say, as big tech, what is our social responsibility for the world? I think we can all agree the top 4 out of 5 companies by market capitalization in the world are technology companies. In other words, we've entered a space where if one of them gets a flu, the rest of the world will get a serious disease. And that's the power of this. So what are some of the solutions? And I think this is where the difficulty comes in. Because on the one hand, you've got to worry about something called competitive advantage if you're a business, etc. We've got to be clear what are leading to these AI algorithms or any algorithms that are being used. And let's take away the jargon. What's an algorithm? It's an if and then statement. Very simple, right? And we build that logic in. Who am I to say, if you say X, Y should be the outcome? As much as you and I think about it, these things are not just automated, they're driven and coded by humans at some stage. Okay? 75% of code is now generated by AI. We know that. We've seen 1,000% increase in the number of websites that have been generated by AI. And if we think about that from a political perspective, from a voting perspective, we used to talk many years ago, the last election, Toby, it was, oh, let's have a look at this website. It took people time and money to put together. With AI now, within 5 minutes, while Nollie is going to be speaking, I can spring up a website, I can get my followers to go onto it, and because it's come from Manoj and Toby and Nollie, guess what? There's truth to it. So what do we need to do? We need transparency. Number 2, we need more international cooperation, specifically around how do we start stopping this from a global perspective. We've seen what the Europeans have started doing. I think when we sit down south, we know probably about 12 or 18 months we generally adopt, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think we need more accountability and responsibility, but more importantly, there's 2 pieces. The one is my colleague sitting here, Michael, and I think we need our media institutions to come back. We need proper journalism to come back. They need to be independent. Yeah. I think we need to be able to start including that counter evidence. And I think we need to have more of these because this is not AI generated. This is a conversation. This is where we get to engage with each other. And I think that's what's going to stop it. Regulation, etc., all has to play together. I think those are big threats at the moment. But my big thing, which I want to close off with, is I think we need to stop worrying if AI is going to affect it. We've got to understand how influential it's going to be, lest we don't learn from what we saw in the US elections in the past, and we don't learn from history. And I want us to never forget, AI is simply going to reflect our own biased past into the future because it's driven by the decisions and the data that you and I have put out there. All AI machines get their data from is existing sources, which is for the first time in our history, you and I are faced with the mirror in front of us, which is a reflection of our past decisions.